Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Just Economy podcast. My name is Cornell Cruz Jr. I am the Executive Director of the Community Reinvestment Alliance of Florida, a membership nonprofit serving the whole state. What we do is ensure that the financial institutions reinvest back into the community per the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. And as you know, we do the Just Economy podcast. We do at least one a month. And we're back again to welcome you back to talk about items that are going on in the community, issues that are going on in the community, and issues that are going on throughout the state. So before we get started with the Just Economy podcast, I want to also invite you to the Summit 23, which will be held March 2nd, 2023 at the Signature Grand up in Davie. We will be live and online. We have some great speakers. We have some great breakout sessions. And as usual, we're going to feed you. So breakfast and lunch. So make sure that you come and make sure that you attend. You can find tickets at www.reinvestmentalliance.org. Please go and secure a ticket and come out to our event. It's our signature event of the year, and we look forward to having you. So today, we have a very special guest. His name is David Peery, JD, at the Miami Advanced Racial Equity Mission. He is an advocate, has been a true advocate for the community. I've had the good fortune of being in several workshops and classes with him. David has been a great advocate for the homeless, a great advocate for racial identity in Miami-Dade County and throughout the state. If you follow him on Facebook, he's constantly traveling and constantly talking about the issues here in South Florida and bringing those problems and issues to the country so they better understand what we're doing here. And he's also a constant consultant with the county, with the cities, to encourage them to work better as far as racial relations and the homeless is concerned. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, and we greatly appreciate you. So David, tell us a little bit about you.
Certainly. I am the executive director of the Miami Coalition to Advance Racial Equity. See your little T-shirt here. Mm-hmm. We are a fairly new organization. The concept arose in mid-late 2021, and we got organized in, I believe it was December of 2021. Mm-hmm. And so we celebrated our first birthday just 2 months ago.
Oh,
and
congratulations.
So we are a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. I encourage everybody, here's my plug, go to www.miamiracialequity.org. That's www.miamiracialequity.org. You'll see our website. And essentially our mission is to dismantle the systemic structural racism that leads to our affordable housing crisis, lack of access to health care, and suppression of voting rights. We subscribe to the Abraham Kendi proposition that all social justice issues have a racial equity component to them. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's.
Well, David, we have a lot to talk about today, don't we?
Okay.
We have a lot to talk about. So a little bit, let's talk. I love that. I love people's history. So let's talk a little bit about you. How did you get from where you were before to here?
Certainly. So I am a graduate of a law school, George Washington University School of Law, and I have a law degree. Despite having that law degree, I do have an experience of homelessness. Through a bizarre intersection of a false arrest, unlawful self-help eviction where I lost all my possessions, and being laid off from my job, I actually found myself living on the streets of Miami, as incredible and bizarre as it seems. And once I got into this homelessness, it was very difficult to get out. Every day it's kind of compounded in trauma. But once I met those challenges of homelessness, it's a part of me, and I'm very much committed to ensuring that no one ever suffers that type of trauma and that we find solutions to our cities and our nation's affordable housing crisis.
Yeah. So David has actually lived the experience. So I mean, what's a better teacher than experience? Granted, that's not an experience I would wish on anyone, but it's very, very important that we have people who are advocates who actually have felt what we're trying to advocate for. I've sat on and chaired many board of directors and many boards throughout nonprofits throughout South Florida and Florida in particular. And I always say that we need to have someone who uses our services on that board. That needs to be a part of it, because no one can speak to it better than you, right?
If I can say, that's absolutely critical, essential, that all policies involving homelessness must have people with lived experience of homelessness at the table. For two major reasons. I mean, obviously, the people who have experienced homelessness are the experts, and so they are the people most informed that can help to lend solutions. And also, any policy that does not include the people affected by the policies will just lack credibility, and will be not just ineffective, but also inefficient.
Agreed. So let's start there. Let's start with homelessness, and I got a particular bone I want to pick. City of Miami came up with a plan to use Virginia Key Beach to put the homeless there on the Virginia Key Beach, absent from services, absent from real transportation, and quite a ways away from hospital districts and so on. That fight has been going on for a few months now. I was very interested to hear what you were thinking about this.
Sure, and this was actually a priority of MCARE in the second half of 2022. We led some rallies against it. We came out very strongly against it. And we also got several hundred people, I think, to the Miami City Commission hearings to comment on this. Let me be very blunt here, that this is a very misguided plan, not only rooted into a ignorance about the causes of homelessness, the root causes of homelessness, but again, I'll be very blunt here. There are certain racial, if not racist, components to a plan to intern, and that's basically what this would be, an isolation internment camp, to intern a mostly black homeless population on the island that was the site of the segregated beach. And so this is not just a coincidence, but this seems to be more of a return back to the segregation. And even though some of the commissioners want to draw a fine line, well, it's not actually on the beach. Those type of justifications are irrelevant to the symbolic point that you want to. Miami's homeless population is 60% black. Even though black people are only 18% of the overall county population.
Yeah, I saw
so
the
basically
numbers.
Isolating a mostly black population on the island, just down the block, okay, about a mile away from the historic segregated beach, and the optics are horrific.
Yeah, I have a special affinity for that particular beach. My mother and father both went to that beach when they were kids, and that was the only beach that they could go to. And so I really feel that. And when I first heard about this plan, I was like, really, what are you guys thinking? You know, they're so far away from services. Then you want to take the beach that was segregated for many years, and now you want to turn it into segregated again, with that homeless population being what it is, and the racial makeup of that homeless population. So do you see a way forward out of this, or do you think this is what's going to happen?
No, I do see a way forward. The good thing about this is that this misguided plan, and by the way, you're asking what are they thinking? It's simply part of the overall plan to sweep homelessness under the rug, to try to a totally futile, useless plan to try to deport the homeless out of the city and hide the issue of homelessness, which frankly will not work.
Yeah.
Okay, because people don't choose to be homeless, and you just can't just throw them away.
But right there, though, I think that seems to be a attitude that by some who feel like the homeless choose to be that way. I'm like, who would choose that? If you, of all the things you could choose in this world, who would choose that You know, and who would choose to be homeless, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, not being in a shelter, not being able to be safe from the elements? Who would choose that?
So this myth that homelessness is a choice is one of the most misguided, reckless, and dangerous myths. I think it's partially rooted in our cultural bigotry against the poor. We tend to believe that people are poor by choice, and if they would just lift themselves up by the bootstraps, take a shower, put on a clean shirt, that they could get a job. Which really ignores the fact that when you're living on the streets, it's a very painful experience. It's a very traumatic experience, and exactly what you said. Anybody who believes that homelessness is a choice, I would encourage them to grab a strip of cardboard, go out there and sleep on the streets yourself and experience it. It's mostly the people who have never been there who would say something like this. Okay, without actually experiencing it themselves. You're vulnerable to theft, violence, constant, especially if you're a woman. 100% of the women who have ever been homeless I've talked to either have experienced or been threatened with sexual violence. It's a very painful, traumatic experience, and that pain and trauma is compounded on a daily basis. You have constant sleep deprivation, because that's when you're most vulnerable at night. And sleep deprivation has concrete effects on your mental and behavioral health.
I've experienced not homelessness, but just in my position, I was in the military, spending a lot of sleepless nights, and it's not, and it adds to anxiety. Even if you're trained for it, it still adds to anxiety in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So, David, I know that you go around the country and you talk about homelessness and you talk about the injustice on the homeless. What are a couple of solutions that we might be able to work on as far as dealing with the homelessness concerned?
Well, I think you need to first look at the causes before you can talk about the solutions, because obviously the solutions have to be related to the causes. So homelessness, I think if you look at it objectively, you're going to see it's not just here in Miami, but you're going to see a huge racial disparity in terms of homelessness across America. You're going to see that although America, I think Black Americans are 13% of the population, they're about 40% of the homelessness population. So Miami is just simply a microcosm of what's happening across the whole country. Black people are 3 times more likely to be homeless than white folks, than our white brothers and sisters.
Which goes back to our housing disparity in the first place.
Exactly. So this lends to an understanding that homelessness is deeply rooted in racism and historical segregation, the housing discrimination that happened where Black people were excluded from benefits like the GI Bill, for instance, or redlined from out of certain neighborhoods and segregated into others, were excluded from the wealth generation, basically, that other segments of the population were able to take advantage of. And this is the consequence of it. And also you'll see that much of government benefits were purposefully designed, basically, to exclude a large portion of the Black middle class away from the wealth that was generated through housing. So this is the reason why you have these racial disparities. So there's certain short-term solutions that we can look at in terms of homelessness. There's a program called Housing First. It's a concept where you put the homeless into housing first, without preconditions. And that stabilizes people. You hook them up to case management services in order to address the root causes, but you don't say you got to go to a rehab or anything like that. You put them into housing, and that stabilizes them. The fog lifts. And then after a certain period of time, they can then address the problems that led to homelessness in the first place. And there are certain long-term solutions that we can take to put an end to chronic homelessness. And that really would lift the community as a whole in terms of increasing the stock of affordable housing.
And I know, and I'm pretty sure that you think you believe like I believe. I believe housing is a right in this country. Housing should be a right. It shouldn't be something that we get to play with depending on how much money you have or the amount of clout that you carry. It should be a right in this country, as you so eloquently noted. The housing discrimination has been the first issue towards that. I don't know if you know this or not, but we're not right now. The African American home ownership is less than it was in 1965. Yes. 1965, we're talking about when Jim Crow was rampant, when redlining was rampant and legal, and for those of you who don't know what redlining is a what they used to do is they actually put a map of the city on the table. They draw a red line around certain neighborhoods that were black neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They would draw red lines around black neighborhoods, and those black neighborhoods didn't get any resources. They didn't get any bank investment. They didn't get small business loans. They didn't get mortgages. They didn't get refinancing. They didn't get any of that. Yet they still thrived in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And there's one not far from here, and it was called Overtown. My mother grew up in Overtown. My grandmother owned a beauty salon in Overtown for over 50 years. Wow! Great. So I know the area well. Okay. So those type of items is the root cause. The actual. And I don't want to use this term too loosely, but the actual anti-housing of the black community has been at the root of this. Yes. And when I sit here and I say to you that there's less black home ownership now than there was in 1965. Yes. Before, at the height of Jim Crow, and when the Affordable Housing Act was established, that should ring something in your brain, right?
Yes, yeah. So Cornell, all these issues are related. Homelessness is at the extreme end of our housing crisis. Sure. The extreme end of the spectrum of our housing crisis. But our housing crisis affects all of the socioeconomic classes. The homeless are simply at the end of the spectrum because they have no access to housing at all. But what you noted about redlining is really happening today under a much more pernicious and harder to deal with effort. There's news that has come out over this last year, and ABC News did an excellent special on this, about whitewashing appraisals, homeowner appraisals, where appraisers will, if they figure out that a home is owned by a black person, will appraise it far lower than the same exact home that's owned by a white person. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen this happen. And what this results in is this huge wealth inequality that you see among black homeowners and white homeowners. Yeah. When you see the same exact house, when they take away the photos and the furniture and the things that indicate this is owned by a black person, and they put a white couple in there, it's appraised at a much, much higher
up to $500,000 more. It happened in one instance to a couple in one of the northern states. I'm sorry, I can't remember the state. It was Oakland, in Colorado. Yeah, you're right. And what they did was de-black the house. You mean to tell me even after I paid all the money for it and I actually want to I have the opportunity to purchase. I purchase, right? I've already jumped through hoops to purchase. I've purchased, and then now I want to refi, and now wait a minute. I got to de-black my house in order to get a fair appraisal. Nobody's asking for anything more than fairness. Just a fair appraisal. That's all I want. But I got to de-black my house for you to give me a fair appraisal, right, which bites into generational wealth. And exactly. And how many times before now has this happened that we don't know of, or somebody was like, okay, I figured I got to accept what I got to accept. Of the housing appraisers, there are 78,000 housing appraisers in this country. Of those 78,000, less than 5% are black. Less than 5%. So I had a conversation with Secretary of HUD one day. I was part of a larger group, and I got to speak, and I explained to her that situation. I explained that's like, maybe we need to put some more money into, or at least build some programs to get more black housing appraisers, because there's no way I should have my house devalued just based on the color of my skin.
Yes. That, as I said, results in this huge wealth inequality gap. Okay, but even worse, as I said, these are issues are all interrelated. There's also an effect that keeps, because of low appraisals, because of the inability to build generational wealth. That's what leads and exacerbates our homelessness crisis, because homelessness is deeply rooted, not just in racism, okay, the historical housing discrimination racism, of which whitewashing contributes to, by the way.
Sure.
But also is rooted in intergenerational poverty. Okay, and that's the reason why you see this racial disparity in terms of who is homeless and who is not.
So please elaborate a little bit on intergenerational poverty.
So what we see here is that people who are born into a particular socioeconomic financial quintile, okay,
Gotcha.
stay within that quintile, okay. So it goes to the old axiom: choose your parents wisely. Okay, people who are born wealthy tend to stay wealthy.
Yeah.
People who are born poor tend to stay poor, and it's not by choice. It's because of the opportunities that are available to you. That's not to say that there are exceptions, but of course there are exceptions. And it's not to say that we have this immutable caste system that locks you in. All I'm saying is that the currents tend to dictate where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
And so
we've
if you're,
seen that in neighborhood after neighborhood. I don't know if you remember, some years back there was a study on the life expectancy of people who live in Brickell and the life expectancy of people who live in Overtown.
That's horrible.
Less than a mile apart.
Yes.
Less than a mile apart. But it was, I mean, it was a difference of anywhere from, I think it was up to 12 years.
Yes.
The life expectancy was that different.
Yeah. Your address determines your life expectancy. that's
incredible.
That's pretty bad. Along the same lines, and this also goes to why anybody would choose to be homeless, the life expectancy of a person experiencing homelessness is 20 years less. Wow. Okay, 20 years.
But I can understand it, though. It's an amazing stat, but I understand that all that stress and not to mention not being able to eat well, not being able, as you stated earlier, sleep deprivation, safety, not to mention all those items that are already on you, right?
And the homeless suffer disproportionately from various chronic diseases. Cardiovascular diseases are very high, hypertension, blood pressure being elevated. The homelessness have a greater incidence of diabetes, okay? And if you have diabetes and you're on the streets, you are seriously in trouble because you have no refrigeration to store your insulin and other...
And it has to be refrigerated.
Yes, and other medications necessary for you to control your diabetes. COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, is much higher. And so you have all these chronic diseases that we call the determinants of health. They are not communicable diseases. They are diseases caused by your socioeconomic class. Okay, because you're out of there on the streets, you have all these stress and anxiety issues, you're much more likely to get these diseases, and these diseases contribute to your much lower life expectancy. Who would choose that?
No one. No human being would choose to live that way. So, when I hear, like you said earlier, when I hear folks say, well, they choose to live that way. Nobody would choose that. Nobody would choose that personal torture for themselves, because that's what it is, torture.
Well, so I think that many people in all good faith may confuse or conflate the refusal to go into a very restrictive, debilitating shelter system, dehumanizing shelter system, versus choosing to go into permanent housing. Until I became homeless myself, I was also rather confused by why do people choose not to be in homeless shelters? And you'll see that most of the people who push homeless shelters have never spent one night in them.
Really?
And I can tell you that shelters are, even though they're on the executive level, they're done in good faith by executives who want to get people off the streets. When you look at the operations level, the people who actually day-to-day run the shelter, they often treat you at best condescending like a child, at worst with pure contempt for who you are. They strip you of all your dignity.
While at the same time basing their job and their income on helping homeless people.
Yeah. They come across as like, quote unquote helping the homeless, but they treat the homeless. Many of them often treat the homelessness with pure contempt, at best condensation or condescending, I should say. But at worst with pure contempt. But here's the reason why most people refuse to go into shelters. It's not just because of the myriad of rules, and I make no exaggeration. Last time I was in a shelter, I actually had to sign 32 pages of rules.
32 pages of rules?
Yes. So it's not that you just don't want to comply with the rules. It's just that the rules are so complex. When to go to sleep, when not to go to sleep, when to eat, when not to eat, when to see your case manager, when not to see your case manager. They're also rife with sanctions and that invite violations and eventual banishment.
Explain the sanctions. What do you mean by sanctions?
So if you fail, for instance, I was banished for a year, despite me having a law degree and wanting to comply with the rules. I was banished from a year from the Chapman Center here in Miami, okay, because of my supposed failure to meet with my case manager at the appointed time. The point is that these times are rigidly set, okay, and they conflicted with my driving 12 to 14 hours a day as a Lyft driver at that time to try to save enough money to get myself out of the shelter.
So it sounds like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. Even though I was trying my best to comply with the rules, unbeknownst to me, they banished me. Only found out after. Okay?
No, so wait a minute. Hold on, David. Hold on. So you're saying to me that they banished you for a year because you couldn't make the appointment. Why you couldn't make the appointment was because you were trying to work so you can get enough money to get back into a house and get out of the cycle in the first place. That was just saying to me right now.
They banish you often for non-safety related, non-violence related type issues. But here's my point. Okay, getting back to the point of why people refuse to go into shelters. Shelters strip you of that one last remaining possession that you have. Okay, when you're on the streets, you're constantly subject to theft, and you're vulnerable to people and the police trashing and stealing your possessions. So you basically have nothing. Okay, but your sense of autonomy, your sense of some type of control over yourself. And that is a very important, essential sense to have. And it contributes to your sense of self-esteem. If you have no self-esteem, you're basically helpless. You feel like crap. People treat you like crap. And then you start to act like crap.
Yeah.
Okay? And this is what shelters do. They strip you of that last remaining possession, your sense of any type of control over yourself. And once you lose that control, you're like in a prison, and you feel helpless, and then you start to act it out. Okay, and this is the reason why people refuse to go into shelters. It's like, would you walk into a prison?
Yeah, not on my own, no.
No. Okay.
Not on my own.
And that's essentially what it is. It's a low security prison.
So why do you think that there's not been some type of reform or some type of change in how this is done?
So there are concepts of low barrier shelters that do not have curfews, that do not kick you out. They're simply a place where people can have some temporary solace, where they can pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and get themselves back into the housing and economy again. Those types of shelters are greatly resisted by many of the policymakers, who, again, are misguided by the reckless proposition that people choose to be homeless and that they're lazy and irresponsible and they simply are all mentally ill and want to use drugs. And so there's a lot of judgmental condemnation of people without really understanding why people are homeless. And so what we need to do is take a look back at the low barrier shelter system. We need to use say hotels and motels, for instance, as bridge into permanent housing. And I think that's a solution. We actually saw this during the pandemic.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, during the pandemic, during the early years of the pandemic in late 2020, we were able to get every single vulnerable person off the streets and into shelter. And that really shocked me. Okay.
So we have the possibility. We can do it. We've shown we can do it, right?
Look, I will never accept the excuse that the money isn't there, because when we want to put the money there, we can. We have sent some $50 billion to Ukraine, for instance, okay, to help them out to fight a war. We're able to find money to take all the vulnerable people, all the people over 60 years old, all the people suffering from disabilities, what we labeled to be the particularly vulnerable groups, off the streets, every single one. I was shocked. I was astonished. And we did that within months.
Yeah.
And so these excuses that we cannot solve the homelessness problem, to me, are nothing but justifications or rationalizations for government refusal to do anything. It can be. We've shown that it can be done.
I'm in total agreement with you. I saw that so much that was accomplished in the pandemic, and I've thought about, okay, these issues didn't just start with the pandemic. We've had these issues before, but it's never been able to be solved. But now all of a sudden, since the pandemic and it touches everybody's money, now everybody we can solve those things quickly.
So I would correct you there. I would say it's never, not that it's never been able to be solved, that's never chosen to be solved.
I see your point.
Okay, because we have the resources, we have the money, we know what it takes to end homelessness. The only thing lacking is the political will.
Yeah. It's amazing what you say, David, and I love listening to you talk, and I love bringing your ideas and concepts. So, you said that let's go to something else that your organization does, and that's voting, because you just said something very, very important: the political will. And it's truly my opinion that if you're not doing your job and you're not doing what's supposedly helping the whole community and not just a few, but helping the whole community, then I need to fire you. And how do I fire you? I vote.
Yes, it's very important for us to hold our politicians accountable. Ultimately speaking, Cornell, homelessness is a failure of government. Okay, it is because of policy decisions being made by government. It is not because of broken people. It is because of broken government and our broken system. As I said, homelessness is simply at the extreme end of our housing crisis that results because of policymakers' decisions. We are rewarding these predatory developers who are, especially here in Miami, a lot of out-of-country money that's simply going into preying upon people who need housing, or actually putting money more into luxury development to reward folks who have a lot of money from overseas. And so we must elect politicians who, especially locally here in Miami, who refuse to grant permits for developments without allocating at least some of that development to low-income no-income individuals. That the two must be coupled. And unfortunately, our policymakers, especially here in Miami, our Miami City Commission, they will grant permits without any regard at all to workforce housing or affordable housing, and that simply exacerbates.
Or there's very little of it.
So we need to hold them accountable.
Yeah, there's an instance of a building that went up in Overtown, and I actually had this conversation with the city of Miami mayor, and I said, there's 367 units in that building, of which 20 were for low to moderate income and workforce housing. 20 out of 367 that's in a low to moderate income census tract and an opportunity zone.
I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about off on 14th Street and near Miami Avenue, northeast. Yeah, there's actually 4 buildings, and I think a 5th one is actually going up. It's an Argentinian developer, I believe. And that is actually a failure of a former Miami City Commission member. He's now on the county commission that headed the Overtown. What's it called? Park West.
The Overtown CRA.
Right. But that's a graphic example of a developer, of a city commissioner, of the failure of a city commissioner to look at the interests of the community and abdicate his responsibility. Okay, essentially to protect the community. That development was really the final nail, I think, in the coffin of Overtown.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I, as I said, I know I have a lot of
Yes.
history, at least from my mother and father
Yes.
and my grandmother have a lot of history in Overtown, and it pains me to. I tell people who come visit our city and I take them on a tour or something. I can put you on the corner of Northwest 2nd Avenue and 8th Street,
Yes.
and you can actually watch gentrification going right in
Yes.
front of your face while you're standing there.
Yeah.
It's just that prevalent.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, and as well as income gentrification, the same, it's the same thing that's happening there. So as we talk about voting, what are you guys doing in order to try to get the message out to vote?
Let me just say, I'm real quick here as a last comment on that last topic here. In a sense, homelessness is a choice. It's a choice of these government policymakers. It's a choice of the people that allowed I-95 to devastate several hundred homes in Overtown. And
Wiped
more
out
recently,
a whole area.
Yes, and more recently, it's a policy choice of commissioners to allow this rampant predatory type of developments to take place without any regard to affordable or workforce housing. In terms of voting, it's absolutely essential that we get these commissioners who are basically lapdogs for the predatory developers out of office. And I'm sorry that I'm being rather, I hope this
That's
is not
what this podcast is for.
Or rather blunt, but
Please
you must be accountable to the community. You absolutely must be accountable. You're not just in the pockets of the rampant developers. You also have an interest. You also have a duty to serve the members of your community. And if your community is not being served by your decisions to simply ignore their interests, then we got to hold you accountable. We got to remove you from office. We got to put the people in office who are sensitive to the concerns of our richly diverse community, not just a particular segment of the community.
Totally agree.
But we are strengthened by our diversity. And let me repeat that. We are strengthened by our diversity. And that's what MCARE is. We're not just a black organization. We're a multiracial coalition of organizations that celebrates the rich diversity of our community because that's important. We're black, we're Latino, we're South American, we're Central American. And this is what makes Miami strong and what makes Miami great is when we come together as a diverse community, celebrate our common interest, and work together to strengthen those bonds. And that's what builds Miami, not the simple looking at the interests of the deep-pocketed individuals, but looking at the interests of the community as a whole.
Yeah, because I'm a firm believer in this as far as the politicians and elected officials are concerned. I would love for you to stop playing to a small segment and play and look at your constituents as a whole, what's needed in the community as a whole. Because just think about it: if you do what you're supposed to do for that concerns everyone. Now, I believe me, I understand you can't please all of the people all of the time. I get that. However, if you do what you're supposed to do as far as your constituents, as far as your city, your community is concerned, you will get reelected. Yes. You won't have to worry about. You won't have to be in the pockets of owing anyone, right?
Right.
You can if you just do your job and do what you're elected to do as far as maintaining the whole community and not looking out just for a few.
Exactly. So it's become a little bit of a cliche, but I think that it's truth that a rising tide lifts all boats.
Totally agree.
Okay, and this is what MCARE looks at. We look at the most vulnerable and marginalized portion of our community, and we work to lift the floor of our community, the floor of services available to the individuals, and we believe that by lifting folks out of homelessness, it ripples through the community as a whole and benefits and values the community. By increasing, say, minimum wages that thankfully that ballot initiative passed a couple of years ago to the lowest income affects and ripples through the community as a whole as people spend money. Okay, that benefits everybody in the community. So let's not just look at the upper quintile, the upper portions of it. That trickle down theory does not work, because what's trickling down is not money. It's what's trickling down is some other noxious body waste there. But
yeah, you're right. But David, I'm not sure if you agree with me, but I'm a firm believer in this, and that is you don't make money off of rich people. You make money off of poor people.
You make money as the community as a whole spends the money throughout the community. And this is what we actually saw as one of the benefits of desegregation, by the way. We saw a revitalization of the South's economy. Once we got rid of Jim Crow segregation in the mid-late 60s, guess what happened? Black people started spending money throughout the whole economy, okay? Yeah. And so what this does is lift the economy as a whole. Atlanta went through a serious economic revival in the early and mid-70s.
Clearly, and look where they stand now.
That people don't realize. Yeah, and so these, so this is basically just one graphic example of how a rising tide lifts all boats, okay? And so we look. If you put money in the pockets of people and you grant housing to people, okay, because housing is a fundamental.
Housing is a stabilizer.
It's a fundamental human right. Every industrialized country, aside from the United States, ensures that its citizens have both housing and health care.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that's a whole nother issue, how the United States stands alone in the world. Okay, basically, without guaranteeing universal health care coverage.
Our standing is I think we're 25th in the world of the industrialized nations as far as healthcare is concerned.
Yeah.
And we still have the issues with it. And we saw, even brought on again by the pandemic, that it didn't take 5 years to develop something. They developed a vaccine within months. And granted, the government spent a lot of money on it, but still not nearly as much money as they would charge. And now there's rumors going up now that they want to increase the cost of the vaccine by 400%.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
This came out Monday. I just read an article on Monday about that.
Well, the capitalists need to make a profit, right? Off of misery and disease.
Yeah. That's the American way, isn't it? It's the American way. So let's talk a little bit about health. And overall health, not just with homelessness, but overall health, and how you see healthcare in our country. Now, we know that healthcare is also racial.
Yes.
Black women, by far and away, have the mortality rate for Black women, especially those who are having babies, is far and away larger than that of whites. We also know that. I saw something that really irked me during the pandemic. A survey came out of doctors, and this was not doctors who were 100 years old. These were doctors that they did the survey in 2018 and 2019. And doctors in 2018 and 2019, 66% of them said that Black people didn't feel the pain that white people felt.
Yeah. There's still a lot of myths regarding Black health. That's why we need a little more diversity within the medical profession, and not just more Black doctors, but also increased training and sensitivity and to the needs of your diverse patient population, which unfortunately our current state government is discouraging those type of conversations.
Agreed.
But to answer your question, these are not separate issues. That they're very much linked. That housing is linked to health care. When you look at the extreme end of the spectrum, housing actually is health care to the homeless. Once you put the homeless into housing, their health increases dramatically. Not just the fact that you can store your insulin medication in refrigerators, and you have greater protection against your medication being thrown away and tossed. But also the lessening of the stress and anxiety has concrete benefits to your physical health. So housing is health care. And then when you look through the socioeconomic classes, you see that safe and affordable housing does have effects on your health. When you're living in a rat-infested, mold-infested tenement housing, such as we've often seen in places in Liberty City and in Overtown. We have, I know you had Adrian Madrid from Smash on. I'm pretty sure he told you about the story about a rat in the toilet.
I've seen the video several times.
Yes. Some of these disgusting places. So healthcare does have a concrete relationship with safe and adequate housing. And even when you go through the socioeconomic classes, you'll see that the better your housing is, the better your healthcare is. And it's not just a correlation without causation. They're both connected.
Well, I'm so glad you're linking the two. I'm really, really glad. I'm really glad to hear you say linking the two between healthcare and safe, clean housing. Because if you know how many times, as you stated, how many times have we seen folks who live in dilapidated housing or housing that is unsafe, and their health care is not good at all, and which leads to a lot of other things, such as they maybe can't go to work more days than the other person, than folks who live in another neighborhood can, or they don't have the availability of transportation. All those items come into play. So I'm really glad to hear you guys linking the two.
Yeah. To use one example, for instance, a case study in asthma, for instance, asthma rates are actually rising here in the United States.
Really?
And you see, and asthma can be incredibly debilitating. Mm-hmm. Okay, it can lead to an early death, and it leads to a lot of loss on productivity and days off from work and increased healthcare costs. And you'll see that even though it's rising across the socioeconomic classes, it's most prevalent within obviously the lower socioeconomic classes. And one cause that we're seeing here is because of our increased immunosensitivity, for instance, to mold infestation that you'll see on the walls, you'll see in dilapidated air conditioning units. You see increased sensitivity when you have roach and rats in your house, and the feces that they'll leave behind. That increases your immunosensitivity, basically, to diseases. Okay, and so we see a correlation, or at least I think many health professionals will see a connection between rat and rodent infested and mold infested houses and increased asthma rates and other immunotype issues.
Yeah, it's so important. I don't think I guess folks don't really don't correlate the health, and especially in housing that is substandard, the housing being substandard, and the health care of that particular person. As you just stated, David just ran off with some devastating stats about what causes their health detriment of health of folks who live in this housing. So we can't just look at, okay, we put a roof over their heads, okay, and that's the end of it. That's the end. The answer has been done. We put a roof over their heads. No, we still haven't solved all the issues, because there's health issues that are involved that are coming up, and that also puts a stress on our healthcare system and the cost of healthcare, right?
Yes, and again, the United States stands alone among all the industrialized nations of the world without providing some type of universal health care. Some nations, such as Germany, provide insurance. Other nations, such as the United Kingdom, for instance, has a national health insurance. And despite all of these cries of socialismo, and comunista, the fact remains that the most successful healthcare program is a socialist type program, Medicare. Okay, is government.
How many times do we hear during certain elections that keep your hands off my Medicare or my Medicaid?
Keep your government out of my Medicare.
Okay, who you think running it?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly, and that's the most successful healthcare program, the most strongly supported program. And so the people, it's kind of strange here, is that many of the people who rely heavily on Medicare will unfortunately vote for politicians that want to dismantle and oppose universal health care. And I'm like, well, excuse me, what do you think Medicare is? Okay.
Exactly.
And so there's a disconnect here against people who take advantage of these programs because it's really simplistic to call it socialism.
Yeah,
because it's more than that.
Yeah.
Okay, these are social democracies, so it's not just a simple socialism versus evil socialism versus wonderful free market capitalism.
But it's
much more complex than that.
But again, it's our money. It's our money. Where do you think it comes from? It comes from our taxes. It's our money. So we're investing money on ourselves and on in our own health care.
But
right?
unfortunately, most people are misguided by this belief that the poor people are getting freebies. Okay, we're throwing money at the lazy, misguided, irresponsible poor. Okay, and we're making them dependent, suckling from the government teat, for instance, and making them dependent upon on government. And I think that's an incredibly condescending, offensive, and misguided
Totally agree.
notion. And there's no evidence of that somehow we're going to create some type of blind, misguided class of people who want to just sit around and get freebies from the government and government benefits. In fact, much of that is rooted in unfortunate racism.
Sure.
Okay, belief that a lot of black people are just lazy and irresponsible. But I think what the evidence shows is that once you give people a hand up, lift people up, that people are responsible and they want to do things that are productive and they want to contribute to the community. They certainly want to put food on the table, have a roof over their heads, and want to take care of their families. Yeah. And so when you look at, when you stop this dehumanization of individuals and looking at them as irresponsible, and you look at them as human beings just like you and me, who want to take care of their families, want to keep a roof over their heads, you will then understand that lifting up the lower socioeconomic classes helps everyone.
Helps everyone. We're in total agreement, David. Total agreement. So I also noticed in looking on your website, you're going to hold a little visual this Saturday.
Yes.
We all know what happened with the young man in Memphis, yes. And how that's kind of brought the same fight back again that we've been having for years. You know, people often say, well, you know, I never saw this before. I didn't know this was happening. I'm like, it's always been happening. Always. I've been through it myself. I'm sure you have as well. Yes. My father when I first got my driver's license, my father sat me in the car for 30 minutes and we had to talk.
Yes.
You know, so believe me, I understand it. The great thing about not the great thing, but the thing about it now is that it's being televised.
Yes.
Everybody has a camera and everybody can show it. So tell us a little bit about the visual you're going to have on Saturday.
Sure. So on Saturday, February 4th, I think at 4 p.m. at the Torch of Friendship at Bayfront Park, we're going to hold a vigil mostly to pay our respects to a human being, to a son, to a brother. Okay, you have to understand that this is a man who was beaten to death, who was murdered, who was killed, and so we're going to mostly pay our respects to this individual who had died, and we're trying to lessen to a large extent any political statements or any grandstanding by politicians and the like, to understand this is a human being.
Yeah, first and foremost,
who was murdered. And also to understand that this is simply the latest example of a lynching. Okay,
agreed.
The fact that it was done by 5 black officers is quite frankly an unfortunate consequence that we are all subject and influenced, unfortunately, by white privilege and white supremacy, because this is in effect. What happened. You will see that throughout history that oppressors have often conscripted members of the vulnerable class, of the class that they oppress, to help in their oppression.
Sure.
In Auschwitz, they tried to conscript many of the prisoners to act against other prisoners.
And did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Emmett Till, for instance, they conscripted black folks in the neighborhood to locate where Emmett Till was, but before they lynched him. So just the fact that there's 5 black police officers there does not mean that this was not a racial incident. What's unfortunate was that many of us are unfortunately conscripted by oppressive forces. So we want to protest police brutality. This is simply the latest example of a murder of an unarmed black man. If you think that this is unusual, if you think that doesn't happen here in Miami, I think you need to think again.
Agreed.
The only thing unusual about this is that it was filmed. That's the only thing unusual, that these type of things happen regularly. It just so happens that since 1991, I believe, when we first saw it on film with the Rodney King beating, that now, because of prevalence of cell phone and videos and on cameras, that we're now graphically seeing these stories that we've always heard about.
Yeah.
So the
or
only thing,
felt, if you're in you and I position, have felt
yes,
before.
I unfortunately have also been the victim, not of police violence and brutality, but of an unlawful arrest. And that's a whole different story. I can tell you just real briefly, when I was a Lyft driver, I recall an incident where I saw these flashing lights in my rear view mirror, and immediately the stomach acid started churning.
Of course. First thing you do is get nervous and wonder what you
I
get.
had a 30-something white lady in the back seat, and she looked up and she saw the look on my face, the look of terror on my face as I'm about to pull over. And she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, the police are pulling me over." And she said, "Well, so what?" She said, "What's wrong with that? You haven't done anything." I said, "Yes, but I'm a black man." Okay. And you're sitting in my back seat. And so she kind of looked and half smiled and said, "Hey, look, don't worry, I'll protect you."
Yeah.
And,
and if some folks, and I've seen it over and over again, I've even had colleagues who have said, "Well, that's over with, Cornell. You don't have to worry about that anymore." Yes, I do. Every time I leave my house, I have to worry about it. And I think, I guess what has bothered me about this is that you really didn't believe me, or they didn't believe me until now they see it on video. Yeah. So you didn't believe us when we were saying that all these years before the advent of camera phones, right? You didn't believe us then, but now you're seeing these things that are happening and people are recording. And even now there's still some question. Well, we didn't see what happened before the video started. Or if they would have just complied. Wait a minute. There's no law against so-called disrespect. There's no law against me talking back. There's no law against me asking questions. I have the ability to do those things. You don't get to handcuff me or beat me down or even shoot me just because you believe that you were being disrespected by me asking a question.
Right.
But we need, and as you said earlier, diversity is key. This is not just a black problem. This is not just a police problem. Right. This is not just a white police problem. This is everybody's problem because we all want to be treated fairly. Right. We all want to be treated decently. That's all I'm asking. Right. I'm not asking you to do anything outside of the ordinary. And you know how I know you can do it? Because you do it with your own people.
Exactly.
So I know you can do it. I know you can do it. So, these are some of the things that are going through. So I'm really glad to hear that you guys are going to be doing that on Saturday. I look forward to, as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to come out and do some, I do photography in my spare time. Fantastic. So I think I'm going to come out and do some shots. So David, I know there's a lot. We covered a lot. Yes, we covered a lot. But I have one question that I ask all my guests. And that is this. If you had the power to change one thing or numerous things in this world, what would it be?
Oh, wow. One thing, that's a tough one there.
That's why I asked it.
So how can I be rooted into one thing? Maybe I could just say it in one word here is empathy. Okay?
That's a powerful word. That is a very powerful word.
If there's one thing that I could change, and I'm not claiming to be the expert on empathy myself because I'm always being corrected and asked to be a little more introspective into my effect on other people.
Well, we all are.
But I think what we need is to stop this dehumanization and classification of people, a little more empathy into understanding that black, white, Latino, that this whole idea of separate races is a myth. There's only one human race, and that we need to have a more empathy and an understanding of the struggles that our fellow brothers and sisters are going through. Okay, so if there's
profound.
one thing I could change is an increase in empathy and connection and understanding.
That's profound, David. Thank you so much. That was wow. I get it, and maybe that would change the whole mindset of our country, and as we work on diversity, but have an empathy for others, I think would definitely change the mindset. So again, we've had David Peery here, JD, with us here this afternoon. So JD, David, before we leave, tell us, give us your contact information for your organization and yourself.
Sure. www.miamiracialequity.org. all lowercase, one long thing, www.miamiracialequity.org. Join our coalition. Become a member of our contact list. You'll get periodic. I promise you, I will not assault your inbox. Okay. I know I routinely get about 150, 200 emails a day, so I'm very sensitive to that. I guarantee you'll get at most just maybe 2 a week. We have bi-weekly racial equity calls. These are not just black-only calls. These are calls that recognize that there's a racial equity component, unfortunately, to all social justice issues. But get on our contact list, join our coalition, help to lift our community.
Thank you, Mr. David Peery. JD, we greatly appreciate you and getting your experience. Thank you, everyone. And again, this is the Community Reinvestment Alliance of Florida Just Economy podcast, building Florida's just economy, $1, 1 vote at a time. Please make sure that you go to www.reinvestmentalliance.org. Get your tickets for the summit. The summit is March 2nd, 2023. All day long, we'll be having it. We have breakout sessions, some great keynote speakers, and we'll be at the Signature Grand up in Davie. We look forward to seeing you, and we also be looking forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.